Hey, I'm Guac, here to do a little tutorial. I want to make these tutorials to kind of go over some things in more detail than just the old method of do this, do that, and then add details. Kind of want to talk over a thing I'm doing in the background. This is a recording, so if I forget some stuff and I have to correct my stuff, I'll do it pretty quickly. This is over backgrounds, and I just want to talk about adding backgrounds after you got your line work, your colors in. I don't even think I've started shading on this yet. I'm just figuring out what colors are going to look nice compared to the characters on scene. And that's what you want to do. What I want to point out is that I'm at the very bottom layer, and I'm just playing with colors. This is all going to be changed later, so I don't really care if I make mistakes. What I'm putting on right here is called the horizon. You kind of want to put it generally where you want your eyes to be focused at because it's a point of focus. In this case, I want it near the character's eyes because they're talking to each other, while the other one's just looking in the background. After this, I create a selection mask over all the characters, most of their color. You can do this by going to select and then create selection from opacity, which I do a few times so you can see it. And then I make a new layer, and I made a mistake because I put it too low. I put it over every single color layer, and I put it underneath the line layers. And I just start drawing in purple, dark purple. Kind of get it where I think the lighting's going to hit. And you wouldn't think it would have much to do with background, but it's very important to kind of visualize what location you're in when you're drawing, and also what do you think is going to be casting shadow? Because, I mean, there's nothing here yet, but they're in a cornfield of sorts, or some sort of field, and it's narrow enough that light's hitting the characters on the right, but not the one on the left. So it's important to think about where they are spatially. And it's also good to visualize. Before doing this drawing, I went and I looked on Shutterstock for images of cornfields and what it might look like farming. And so I touch up a few things. I forget to I forget to shade the apples or berries, whatever the hell those are. And I had this weird mistake here where something got placed in. You see those dark pixels? So this doesn't really have anything to do with backgrounds. It's just me trying to figure out where that thing came from. And somehow it got put on that layer. I also want to stress that you don't want to put your characters in details on the same layer as the background unless they're actually interacting with a piece of it. Because if you put them on the same layer, then you take out the ability to really edit them. Oh, and what I did here is I took their shadow, which is on another layer entirely, and I set it to multiply, which is a setting for it, and then I lightened it a bit, so because it's a lighter environment, it's daylight. And what I mentioned about, excuse me, playing with the color on these is that you can go back and you can change things. For instance, I thought the ground needed to be a bit more dirt colored. And if there's a character in the background, in this case him, I realized that the shadow would also have to affect and cast off of him. So here's a fun little thing you can do with most art programs. I know you can definitely do it with Fire Alpaca. Is you can see I'm drawing over him and her, but I can create another selection mask right over them, go back to that shadow I just made, delete it. Now it looks like it's casting behind her. Also, excuse me, COVID. After this, if I remember correctly, I stare at it for a bit because you always want to take time to look at things, make sure you're not forgetting anything. This is the part where I just kind of play with the eye colors. I find that green and pink are kind of the hardest to shade, so I take a moment on this. I would say to skip past this, but honestly, you also want to be paying attention to how you're making the eyes when thinking about backgrounds. Because part of the background, technically, is the light. And these are going to have reflections on it. And you want to know, is your character more in the dark or more in the light? And it's always good to make different layers and go back. So the thing about the eyes here is I have the eyes as a solid color, And you don't have to have it solid. You can have it whatever you want. And because they're on their own layer, when I create the selection mask, it actually only does it to the eyes. So I can make another layer over and darken it out. Maybe go even darker to kind of make it look more like their pupils. And once I'm happy with it, I go back in, make another layer, which I'll do here in just a second. And I'll probably set it to dodge. And I'll get a lighter color, and I'll just play around with making the eyes brighter around the edges. And like I said, you want to be very careful of making note of how much of your character is in shadow and how much of them are in light. Also, when you're making a lighter color of the eyes on the dodge, I like to change the color hue just a little bit so it makes it stand out more. And once you're happy with this, you can... No, actually, I go and do one more thing. I do a little experiment here. I've never done this before. I take that dodge layer, because it's not coloring the whole eye, and I make a mask over that, and I play around with lighting on the eye. And I hated that, so I immediately removed it with Control Z. And so I'm trying to add a little bit of a line here. And so I set it to add, but I think I later changed it back to dodge, because add is really, really strong when coloring. Pink's not as difficult to shade, it's a little bit easier. But if you're not careful, the character can look dead inside. Which, depending on what you're going for, might be exactly what you need. So then I go to the very top of all the layers, because I'm going to be adding in the shine. I take my shape tool, which is a solid color, no blur, and if you have blurs, there's a setting on the top, it's like a check mark called anti-aliasing. That'll make it blurry. I have that off. Then I pay attention to where the lighting is. As you saw, I made one light bulb a little bit smaller than the other because it's not nearly receiving as much light because he's in the shadow. She's facing the sun almost, so hers are probably going to be bigger. Yeah, that looks about right. I started this video after I got done making all the collars and drawings and sketches of their eyes because that took a uncomfortably long time and it was very tedious, so I'll leave that out for now, maybe for another tutorial. So now I just take another moment to save, because I like to save after every important moment that I want to be able to go back to if I mess up. And I go back and I play around with the background a bit. I think, what can I do? So first I try thinking about making a line art background, but I don't like how it would draw the focus away from the characters on screen, so I eventually retract on that. And I do what I usually do, is I get a huge brush with anti-aliasing turned on, and how much the brush fills is up to you. And I get about 500 to 700 to start. I'm working on a canvas about 2,000 to 3,000. I find the bigger it is, the harder it is to do backgrounds like this. I don't know if you can hear that playing in the background, my window's open. I start making a bit of the field, because they're kind of in a cornfieldish type place, although I think they're doing berries or something, apples. Weird fruits that don't probably exist. And because the horizon, as you go further out, it gets smaller, so does these bushes. So you have to kind of obey those rules. I think it's called forced perspective or something. Disneyland does it, where they'll make their buildings smaller as it gets to the castle, so it'll actually make it look like whatever's in the background is getting smaller, and then they'll put something really big in the background. Everything I'm putting on these background layers are still different, separate layers, so I can play around. Because as you can see, I took the bush layer, and I did the selection and create mask from opacity, I think. And I just did the same thing I did to the characters, made a shadow. And then I realized that I forgot something, because that bush is an object, even though it's in the background, so it has to cast a shadow. If something casts a shadow, everything has to cast a shadow. And the nice thing is like I mentioned before, these characters are separate from the background. So that means that if I made a mistake, which I just did, I can fix it, and they'll not be affected. I do a lot of playing around with the background here, and that's important because I screwed up on a few things, and what you'll see here is some things I screwed up on and I left until the very last moment, and I changed it because I could. And I start playing around with different tools here. I get my circle tool and I set it so that it selects from the center and it constrains the proportions. And I try making solid color berries. And then I quickly realize that it doesn't fit at all because everything else is blurred. So you want to be consistent. If you have something blurred with no line art, don't put line art on something else. These characters are in the foreground, and there is no, I forget, it's background and then middle ground and foreground, I believe. There is no foreground, so they're just kind of the midground to foreground. Although you can also argue that the dude in the middle is the midground because he's going to be somewhat blurred later on. And I'll show you how to do that. It's real fun. A lot easier than my old method too, so. These berries don't look quite right yet, and over time they'll look a little bit more in place. For now though, there's nothing really to say about this. This is kind of ironic to the whole just add detail thing, but that is a part of it, but you can go a little bit more in depth of how you're adding detail. This is just me having OCD about the eye color popping out a bit too much. I will say though, I very lightly press the tablet when I'm making these things, because the lighter it is, the more it'll look like a blur. And so, closer you get, I might put more solid colors, but the farther I go back, I might more lightly press it. I make a layer underneath the berries and put more purple underneath it, which seems to be a really good color for shading shadows. Don't know why. Never been able to have much luck with anything else but purple. And I play around with it, making it trying to look like they're standing out more. I put it to multiply, shade it down a bit. Thought it was okay, too much, and then I turned it down some more. I make a clipping mask or whatever it's called, and I play around with some volumetric shading on these. So I get a bigger brush, darker color, and I just touch it up a little bit to make it look like it's unevenly shaped, because bushes aren't evenly shaped, which might make it look a little bit more like there's shadows hitting different parts of it, which there would be. Because it's blurred, it's a little bit messy, so I later on tried to add some leaves, little shines and ripples of things getting hit. And then I save, because I realize I'm making a lot of detail changes. And if I'm going to be doing something like this, that's going to take a while because I have to hit everything the same way, I'm going to save. I'll just make sure that if I make something like a huge change, I'll save, but before I save, I'll actually copy the layer, which there's a button on the bottom right of the screen near the layers called duplicate layer, and it's underused because people use it to kind of like make things more solid, but I use it to duplicate and just make a backup of things. I don't know, maybe people do it a lot more than that, I wouldn't really know. I tried making a line to see if I can make it look more like it's in the foreground, because that guy in the background is standing out too much. And what I said before is, if something's blurred, you're not going to get away with having it suddenly be lined, and I try it here and it doesn't work. And so I go back on it, and I believe at some point I remove it all. I know I remove it, I just don't know when. You kind of forget what you do when it's been 30 minutes long. This is also the first time I've done a voiceover on something, so I'm pretty new to this, but I'm going to try to do more of them. If you have any pointers, let me know. If you're even still here watching. Here's something I want to touch on really important. This seems really weird, it'll make sense later. I made a layer over him, and I took a very obnoxious, easy to see color, and I drew it over him. And then I hid the layer and then I got rid of it for a bit. There's a reason I did that, and it'll be important later. Because he has to be blurred out a little bit, but his friends needs to stay in focus. Remember how I said you want to keep things you're going to change on separate layers? Well, all three of those characters are connected by layers. So if I try and blur him, it's going to blur all three of them at once. So there's a trick you can do to avoid that, and I'll show you in a bit. Also, all these things I'm telling you about, I know how to do on Fire Alpaca, which is the tool I'm using right now. Past that, I couldn't tell you, but a lot of art programs use similar tools. I had some shine on things, maybe a little bit on her elbow. Figure out what's shiny, what's not. If a character's been working, they might be covered in sweat, so they might have a bit more shine to them. He's made of jello, so he's pretty shiny. He's been talking, so he's probably not been working too hard, so I decided not to actually add any shine on him. I don't really know what these characters are doing out here too much yet. I assume they're like farmers. And I'll duplicate these lines of light, and I'll duplicate it a few times to make it look more solid, and then I'll blur it out, try and get a bit of shine on it. And I put those layers at the very top. I always put my like shimmers and shines at the very top, just so they don't get caught by lines and colors and shadows later on. I find it's kind of handy. And hey, we're almost ready. First, I decided to add a little bit of texture to the road, though. And I want to point out that the horizon line, which you can still see a little bit there, is not blurred. So that's also a problem, because at some point you're going to have that blurred because everything else is blurred. And I said I was playing with the colors before, and this is what I mean. So I made a new color for the sky that looked a little bit more vibrant and blue because it was too lit up, kind of made it hard to see the characters. And I play around with the dirt by redrawing the entire horizon but making it blurry. So you want to get a big brush, and you want to go thin lines to make sure you don't miss anything and accidentally have it be slightly transparent. And once I get close to the end, I switch to a smaller one because it'll make the lines more dense, and I hit it again. And I do it a few times. And hey, there you go. Now it looks like the horizon's blurred too. And I assume they're in a cornfield that's kind of like, I keep saying cornfield, but you know it's not. I assume they're in a field that's kind of like layered, so there's probably another layer behind them. So I'm just going to add that in, but not as big. A fun little trick with this brush is if you press Shift Z on Fire Alpaca, it'll change the color to, instead of placing, remove. So I just kind of gently hit it a few times to make it look like grass. Sometimes you make mistakes, but sometimes it can add to it, kind of like happy little accidents, you know? I add a few berries, but I figured it's so far away it's not even worth adding those details in, so I take them out a moment ago. A moment later. Dang, I'm hungry. I think I'm gonna eat some chicken after this. Every single layer of the background is different, so I could go underneath the road layer, so I could color that grass a little better. And because when you do something to something, you kind of have to do it to everything. So I add little ripples on the top too to make it look more like, kind of like a kelp forest, I guess, but on the ground. I don't know, I put some weird plants in the story. At this point, I'm kind of thinking about maybe adding some detail to the road, and I experiment around with it. I will say that you gotta be careful when you're trying to add detail with blur brushes, because if you do it right, it looks amazing. And if you do it wrong, and most likely at trying to add small details with these brushes doesn't quite go too well. And sometimes, you know, less said the better. Same with drawing. You don't always have to put detail in every spot. In fact, sometimes it's better to leave space alone because it creates dead space, an area where your eye can rest, and then catch up on details later. And I made that mistake here by trying to make the dirt look all worn and torn, even though really, blur-wise, you wouldn't be able to see too much detail on it. And you can still see the dude in the background is really contrasting with it, which is a problem. And here I try it. I try so hard to add little details to it, it doesn't work. And before you finish adding details to everything, if you try it, just take moments to look back and think, does this work? And if it doesn't, you can always delete, go back. Save every once in a while with your layers separated. That way you can go back and you can turn on layers, turn off layers to see. I make the mistake of also putting these lines in the wrong direction on the left side of her, which is really what makes this messed up too, and I fix it a little bit. After getting to about here, I decided it's really not working, but I'll come back to it later. And here's an example I wanted to draw out for you, which is to show you how the background's positioned. This is what I'm imagining in my head. The cornfield, the road, and the sky all have to kind of come to a point because that's a perspective. In fact, if you want to, when you're sketching things out, you can draw one of those just to make it a little bit easier to see. Now what am I doing here? I forgot what I did here. It's also hard to see because when I'm recording this and looking over the footage, on Premiere Pro, the screen is actually a little smaller, so I can't really see what I'm doing with the layers. But what I think I'm doing is I'm checking on different... Oh, wait, no. This character's eyes need to glow, and I realize I made a mistake on that. So once again, I get a weird, obnoxious color, and this is a good example of what I'm going to do later, but kind of different. I want to be able to select this, so I just make a new layer, hit the blur, and then duplicate it so it kind of slowly expands until I get it where I want. Then I select that color, and I delete the shadow. Make the clipping. No, I want to go a little bit more apparently. I like to steal that color, maybe make it a bit brighter. And if you go to protect alpha, it'll do this really cool thing where it'll only draw over the pixels that are already there in the layer. Anything that's not there won't be colored. So you can kind of check your work on that. Then I add a little bit of shading with protect alpha still on. And that looks nice. So I'll leave that. And then I realize I don't like how the shadow's still hitting the underneath. So I go to select the eyes that I just made. I go to the shadow layer and I delete it. Now as you can see, it's showing through nicely. I also copy and pasted those eye layers to the top so I can blur them out and make it look like it's glowing. A lot of times if you make something bright and then add a blur to it, it'll look like it has a bit of a shine to it. And so I play around till I get it so it looks like it's kind of glowing but it's not obnoxious. And I set it to lighten, or I think I put it to dodge. Because I still feel like add is too much of a strong thing. There's different settings for layers. Is this where I get rid of it? No. I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to take him out. Make him blurry. No, I'm changing the hue of the sky. I thought it was too bright still. I like how that looks. Then I add clouds. I don't make it purely white. I use the same color for fur because it's easier to see, still able to add shadow and shine to it. It's just barely darker than pure white. Kind of like a really bright gray. Once those are done, he's still annoying, so I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to fix him. I save because I'm almost done, and you don't want to lose that much progress at a time, so... Man, I'm really hungry. Okay, so I kind of look over everything, do an overview, check my work, and I'm starting to fish through the layers. What I'm doing is I'm looking for the lines, and you'll see when I find one. Actually, what am I doing here? Oh, yeah, what I found was I found a layer that didn't have any content on it at all. You can't see because it's only focusing on this one screen, but basically, if you don't know if you have content on a layer and you want to check, try to do the select thing on that layer, and you'll see it's grayed out. So I moved some stuff around, and I found where the background and the main ground meet, and I add a layer to it. Just an empty layer with nothing on it, and I make it really obnoxiously named so I can tell where the layer line is. So I know if it's underneath it, that's the background, which is very useful. I save once again just to check myself. And I'm still trying to figure out how I get him out of there, but I'm about ready to take care of it soon. So I select them all, and I actually go back and touch something up a little bit here. That after this, you'll see what I do here. Let's go to every single length to make everything adorable. I hope this microphone sounds good. I just got it. It was a replacement for my old one that broke. So I start fishing through my layers and I find where the lines are. I also want to find out where my shine is. You always want your shine to be on the top, and when you're blurring out characters, the shines in the eyes and on the guy in the background, the little shimmers, I never blur those out. I always leave them alone because I don't... The shines are the last thing to get blurred out because they're kind of something that happens in your vision, not really in an object. So what I'm doing here is I'm going carefully through the whole image and finding every piece of line art because they're all in different layers because I like to give myself a little bit of breathing room. And I check and I zoom out just to make sure that there's really no lines anywhere else. And yep, that's it. So now what I do is I duplicate it to make myself a backup. I turn on Protect Alpha, and I'll show you an example of what's cool about it. Is when I draw over something, it'll only draw over the lines. So you see, only her eyelashes are getting colored just because those are the only layer on there that can. So I get a nice blue, maybe a darker shade, and I hit the whole image with it. I darken it just a little bit using filter and then hue and then brightness. And then I go by hand, still having Protect Alpha on, and on the areas that the shadow's hitting, that's kind of where I darken. Or if the character's just really dark like him. I find that dark blue is usually a good one to use because it's kind of close to dark. It's not obnoxious like yellow. Kind of touch up over everything. How fucked up would it be if I was recording this whole time and then I get done and I find out, oh, I didn't even hit the button. So here you can change what color you're shading into the lines. So here I want to make it look like what is it called? Crease definition? I don't know. I want it to look more like it's actually the same color as the skin of the character. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with that, so I save. Still having everything backed up on different layers so that I can always go back if I ever need to. So here's where things get interesting. And I'm paranoid, so I save again. I wish I had my chicken with me, I could be eating it right now. So with all the lines, I move that down just so I can see a little easier. Doesn't really change anything, but gives me some peace of mind. I find the separator for the background and foreground, and I start folding layers down, starting with the very bottom and going up one and down one. And I check that and I realize that's actually technically supposed to be in the background. So, drag it down. Because really, that shadow's not affecting anything. It's just on the floor. So, I move that down a bit. And I continue on. You want to make very sure that you only merge the layers that are open that you can see. Because I have some layers hidden. You can tell because of those dots on the left. And I'm going to show you what happens if you have an empty layer and you merge it by accident. Ah, ugly. So yeah, be careful of that. And you can tell because those are empty. You can see because there's no dots. Oh, so this is how people lose their voices. I'm tired now. And as you can see, I've hit the point where I've hit the shines, so I leave those alone. I don't add any of them. Because I'm not trying to blur those. I'm only trying to blur the physical objects, not the lighting. That's a good point. Don't blur the lighting, just the objects. And that's why I separate the layers. I want to keep track of it. There's even an option to add not a layer, but a file, so you can just keep this separated. But I tried it once and I got too confused. So this is what that blue thing is for. I drag that over that, and as you can see, it's only covering him, the area I want to blur. And I've been making a few selection masks here, but I also notice it's kind of attacking the other two characters as well. So I press Control-Shift, which turns my brush to eraser, and I just gently caress the sides and try and get that thing down. It's still touching them, which I'm not happy with, but I can fix that later. Then I go to Select, create a selection from opacity, and now it's not only selected the whole blob there, but it's also gently selecting everything around it, so it doesn't seem like I just cookie cut them out. It'll seem like a soft blur. And it's still kind of grabbed onto a few of the characters there, so I want to go to that little button on the left, which is kind of like drawing your selection. Everything red is selected. If you press Control-Shift, it will remove, which you'll see here. And if you do the opposite, it'll add. So I'm going to be removing. And I don't use this tool as much as I should because it's very useful. Okay, that's a little better. If it's still cutting into them a little bit, it's not a problem. It's probably not even going to be noticed. So then I copy it, and then I paste. And if you look on the right, I have a layer of all three of them, and I have a layer of just him and a little bit of his friends. So I can take a smaller brush, press Shift Z, not Control Z because that'll undo. Shift Z, and then I will gently delete anything else. And the best part is I still have the layer of all three of them. So if I make a mistake, I can easily go back. And as a force of habit and something I do to check myself when I'm doing this is I'm going to duplicate both the layer with just him and the layer with all three, so I really have an easy way to get back if I need to. And you just duplicate it, and then you also hide the other layer. And I accidentally left all three of them open. So to make my life a little easier, I believe I... What did I do here? I don't remember what I did here. I might be duplicating him again, but probably not. Yeah, that's when I duplicated them. So, I'm kind of lost here. I'm trying to remember what I did. I was experimenting around with how to make it look like he's blurred. I think I removed all three of them. Yep. And then I just left him alone, and I wanted to see, can I make him by himself look blurry? And that's exactly what I did. So I tuned it. You can't see the window, but it's filter and Gaussier blur, and you can select how big it is. And I want him to look like he kind of blends in with the background, and I'm happy with this right here. I add his other layer in just to make it look like he's slightly solid, so it doesn't look like he's just a fuzz. And I play around with the blur tool, but I don't like that very much, so I undo it. There I add his buddy back in, his counterpart, and I turn the opacity, which is that blue bar up there, I turn it down to about half just to make it look nice. I don't do it yet, but I'm about to. Oh, actually, what I did there is I made even another duplicate of the layer, just so I have even another backup. And finally, I decide I've had enough with the texture and I leave the dead space. And already it looks a lot more clean now. And he fits in a lot better in the background. That leaves dead space, and I'm pretty much done. There's a few more things I do, which is finishing up the image, because I have a lot of complicated layers that I need to take out neatly. And I can show you how to do that in just a second, after I save and I'm absolutely sure I'm ready. So what I do is I go to Layer, and I go to Merge All. You can't see it, but it's there. And I deselect the little check mark that says Leave Hidden Layers, I think. If you take that check mark out, it'll merge all the layers, and any layer that's hidden, it'll delete. After that, I make a new layer, add my little watermark or whatever you call it. Then I make the opacity a little lower so it blurs in nicely. Merge the layers so it's one layer, save as a PNG, you're done.